my dear friends that and my other job that I do is being a half blind, and now I'm somewhat not as deaf as I was, but at that time I was half deaf Uber driver. Well, doing my duty, doing my job when we went to Sight and Sound to see David's play, we were gassing the car up. I was gassing the car up while they went into Buc-ee's and got them drinks and went to the bathroom and just refreshed themselves. But I stayed with my vehicle and got it gassed up and ready to go. And I really wanted a Buc-ee's t-shirt. But because I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, taking care of business, I didn't get my Buc-ee's t-shirt. And I guess because of all the whining I've done about it, I come in tonight and I get this lovely card from my dear friends Mark and Anita, and this Buc-ee's t-shirt. So anyway, I thought I'd wear it tonight in honor of them. So that's
Now you can quit whining.
Yeah.
He'll find something else for you.
Good luck with that. All right, so we're going to be studying the book of Ruth again tonight. We got one more lesson after tonight. And I studied it, and interesting tonight, it's going to be kind of curling her hair a little bit tonight because the way she presents us tonight in the story. Because it's going to get a little bit adult story time, because this is going to be kind of the love chapter we're going to be looking at here in chapter 3. And so I love the way she'll present this, and I'll let her do when she does it. She'll talk about it. But we're going to really see the relationship between Boaz and Ruth take place in this time, and she does a great job of giving that. But again, the thing we need to remember about Ruth, and I wrote this right out because the important part of this in this verse 3, chapter 3, is the fact that Ruth goes to lay at I'm drawing a blank. Boaz, sorry. I'm stalling Bucky. So I wanted to say Bucky, and I knew it was Boaz. So anyway, but the thing about it was Naomi told her to go lay at his feet. And the story we get from Ruth, even though it's a short little chapter in the Old Testament, it's all about Jesus. That whole book is all about Jesus. And then what I got to think about that laying at the feet, when you go to the cross, when you go to the foot of the cross, redemption is there. And that's really what the story of Ruth is all about. And that's what especially this chapter is going to be about tonight, is when you go to the foot of the cross, redemption's there, because Bozar was a kinsman redeemer, which was going to bring redemption to the family. And so that's what it's all about. And so it's funny how, remember, Ruth goes back with Naomi to Bethlehem because they know that Ruth is going to get taken care of by a kinsman redeemer, because that's what it says in Deuteronomy and Leviticus to do. Well, Boaz is going to be that guy. But tonight we see a change. Ruth was going to take care of Naomi, but now Naomi's kind of switching the roles on her. And Naomi's trying to help Ruth figure out how to go about getting remarried and coming to a relationship with both. Why can't I say his name? Boaz. So anyway, that's where the story's going to go tonight. And there's just so much in this story, and she does such a great job. And so I think we'll just go ahead and let her get busy on this. But there's so much richness in here. And let's do this before we even go to the film. Let's read this chapter. I want somebody to read, first of all, start at verse 19 in chapter 2 and read that. And then somebody read chapter 3, okay? So let's go ahead and get that done. So somebody read chapter 2, 19 through the end of the chapter, and then somebody read chapter 3. Please.
And her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today, and where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." And Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at those whose place she had been working. The name of the man I work with today is Boaz, she said. The Lord bless him, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. She added, that man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers. And Ruth the Moabite said, he even said to me, stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be hungry. So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvest were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law.
Okay, somebody read chapter 3 for me. Please.
Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Now Boaz, whose young woman you were with, is he not our relative? In fact, he is winning barley tonight at the threshing floor. Therefore, wash yourself and anoint yourself, put on your best garment, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Then it shall be, when he lies down, that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go in and cover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do. And she said to her, all that you said to me, I will do. So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law instructed her. And after Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was cheerful, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came softly and covered his feet and lay down. Now it happened at midnight that the man was startled and turned himself, and there a woman was lying at his feet. And he said, who are you? So she answered, I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative. You want me to read the whole thing?
Please, unless you want to break and somebody else wants to read. You're doing fine. You're doing a great job, by the way.
Then he said, blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, in that you did not go after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request. For all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman. Now it is true that I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative for you, good, let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you, as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning. So she lay down at his feet until morning, and she rose before one could recognize another. Then he said, do not let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Also he said, bring the shawl that is on you, and hold it. And when she held it, he measured 6 ephahs of barley, and laid it on her. Then she went into the city. When she came to her mother-in-law, she says, is that you, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her. And she said, these 6 ephahs of barley he gave you, for he said to me, do not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Then she said, sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out, for the man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day.
A few things about what you read. I thought it was interesting about Boaz at the threshing floor, and they ate and they drank, and I like the part where she says his heart was cheerful from all the drinking. So that's what she says, and she'll explain that a little bit more. Then when she talked, one thing I found interesting, the fact a bushel of barley would weigh 48 pounds, and it said, and that's what how do you say that, Don? Epith?
L and Ephah.
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 Ephah. An ephah is a bushel. So that would have been 48 pounds, so that's 288 pounds. So I haven't figured out if somebody was helping her carry some of that, because if you put that in her shawl, that'd be pretty big.
They were stronger back then than they are now.
Well, yeah, they're probably a little tougher back then, but anyway. So that's some of the stuff I kind of noted that went on. And then the thing about Boaz is he was an older man, because he calls her his daughter to start with. So he calls her daughter. But he must have been a really man of outstanding. In fact, you actually got two people of great moral character going on here. So you got Boaz respecting Ruth, and because the other thing I found interesting, remember, Ruth's a Moabite, and she was married to Naomi's son. So actually, blood relative, she was not a blood relative in fact. But it keeps talking about Boaz was a relative, and that made him the kinsman redeemer to the family. So anyway, that's some other interesting facts about this chapter. And but the thing about Boaz, it really shows his integrity. He knew that there was somebody, a relative closer than him, as it says in the end. And so he tells her to wait until they find out that this other guy, other redeemer, wants to step in and be the redeemer to Ruth. And so that's an interesting how his integrity, moral integrity is. And also Ruth's integrity, because Ruth's integrity was, she was there at the threshing floor with all these young men, but she chose Boaz. And she knew that there was something special about Boaz. But the main thing that's going on here is the redemption. It's all about the redemption, and that's what Jesus offered us, is that redemption. And so that's where this story's going. And so we'll go ahead and roll the tape here. And I'd like to say, now hold on to it's interesting what she's going to start out with, because it gets a little bit, her explanation of this is a little bit more adultish. Is what I'm going to say. Because they understand the story a little bit better. Well, she understands what all the meaning, the Jewish things that were going on in that time. So it's a little bit, I would say, PG-13 rated. All right. Can you handle it, Colonel?
You got it, Tom.
When it comes to love, everyone has something to say. But I personally think the best perspectives come from those under the age of 10. Think about it. They haven't yet fallen in love, so they're not at a place where they are yet smitten or jaded. They don't know that much about love, so they're not trying to tell anybody how it is or how it should be. Their opinions and their thoughts are just pure, unadulterated, hilarious observations. Take some of these for example. 3rd through 5th grade boys who were asked the question, what do you know about love? These are some of my favorite responses. One of them said, well, I know that you're shot with an arrow in the beginning, but then after that, it's not supposed to hurt anymore. Another one said, I think it has something to do with the way you smell. That's why deodorant is so popular. Another little guy, very practical, he said, one of you should know how to write a check, because you can have loads of love, but you're still going to have to pay the bills. Another little guy, clearly raised right, he said, well, you can kiss your mom, that's okay, but if it's somebody new, you have to ask their permission. And then just one last little piece of advice. One kid said, don't forget your wife's name, because that'll mess everything up. So true, so true. Well, today we are in our 4th session in the study of Ruth, and I have entitled this session, Love. Now, if you've been tracking along with us, you are probably wondering, where is this session going? Maybe you're asking the question, is she finally going to cave and admit that yes, they did fall in love and it's everything that Hallmark could have hoped for? No, I'm not. But I will admit that from chapter 2 to chapter 3, there is certainly a development of warmth and affectionate. And I'm looking forward to unpacking that with you. So, let's get a running start by turning back to the end of chapter 2. Ruth has just arrived home with her massive gift of grain for Naomi, and let's read Naomi's response starting in verse 19. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." And then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she'd been working. "The name of the man I work with today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." And then Ruth tells her that she's been invited to stay on and glean in the field until the end of harvest. And then verse 23 says, "So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law." Now, I want to point out two specific words here in this passage, which are both so much more than words. They're so much more than themes, although they are that too. These words carry a lot of weight, both theologically and according to the law. And the first word is this word, kindness. Now, the Hebrew word here is the word hesed. And this word, it really indicates a stance of loyalty or solidarity to someone. It leads to actions that go above and beyond what would have ever been expected from someone. This really is an action word, too. It's regularly used as the object of the verb to do. So you don't feel chesed, you do chesed. In our Bible, chesed is translated as love, which is not at all wrong, but it's also more than love. It's also translated as kindness, mercy, loyalty, unfailing. It's a depth of love that's often associated with the character of God. And one place where we see this is Psalm 103:8. It says, "The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in chesed and righteousness." Now, in the book of Ruth, chesed is used 3 times. And we first see it in chapter 1, verse 8, when Naomi wishes the chesed of Yahweh on her daughters-in-law. And then we see it here in chapter 2, verse 20, when Naomi declares that chesed has been shown to her and her entire family. And then we're going to see it again here in just a moment in 3:10, where Boaz once again points out Ruth's outpouring of love, but this time he says chesed about her sacrifice for Naomi. Now, just before this moment, Naomi has all but said that God's chesed had run out, that everything she had known about God's promises from childhood was no longer true, if ever it was. But now, chesed is here. Chesed is in her home. It's lying at her feet, and she realizes what is, and she sees what could be, and she cries out praises for provision and for sacrificial love for the living and for the dead. Naomi's story, her family's story, is not over yet. Now, there is one more question about this word before we move on. When Naomi says, "He has not stopped showing chesed to the living and the dead," is she talking about Boaz, or is she talking about Yahweh? Well, this is a question that a lot of scholars have wondered about, but commentator Marian Taylor wonders, could it be both? I mean, perhaps the author of Ruth has left the subject of this verb ambiguous on purpose, so that we might see what we've already seen in the book of Ruth, the theology of divine and human cooperation. That Boaz's chesed is an incarnation of the Lord's chesed. In the same way that Ruth's kindness, recognized in chapter 2, was a reflection of what she had come to know about her Lord's kindness. May we all join with the work of Christ in manifesting such sacrificial love to everyone around us. Now, here's the second Hebrew word that I want to highlight from this passage, and this is the word for guardian redeemer. The word is goel. Now, this word, goel, we see in Leviticus 25:25, and it gives us a little bit of insight into the role and the responsibility of a guardian redeemer. It says, if one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and sells some of their property, their nearest relative is to come and redeem what they have sold. Now, Naomi is also referring to the custom of Levirate marriage, which we've already talked about in previous sessions, a brother of a man who dies without children should marry the widow and give her a son so that his brother's name will not be blotted out of Israel's history. And we see that in Deuteronomy 25. So Naomi doesn't say anything more about the guardian redeemer right now, but it's kind of safe to assume that a plan is starting to formulate. So as we turn the page to chapter 3, we find the end of the barley harvest. Harvesting barley would have taken place between late April and early June, and so probably around 7 weeks has passed, and Ruth has continued to glean in Boaz's field ever since. And yet, there hasn't been a proposal. Now, Ruth has kept her covenant promise to take care of the needs of Naomi, and so now we're going to see Naomi do her darndest to keep her covenant promise, her vow, to find Ruth a husband. And so in verses 1 through 4, Naomi gives Ruth very clear instructions on how to hopefully bring this all about. She tells Ruth that on that night, Boaz and his workers would be on the threshing floor, winnowing the barley, that's separating the grain from the chaff. And there would have been a celebration where there would have been some heavy drinking taking place. And then Boaz would, as any good landowner would do, he would sleep there with his harvest all night. And so Naomi instructs Ruth to wash and put on nice smelling oil and some nice clothes, and then sneak onto the threshing room floor when everyone was passed out, uncover Boaz's feet, and lie down next to him. And then she says, he'll take it from there. And every Christian boy and girl's palms are getting sweaty right now. Like, what is happening? Well, I do want to explain a few things here, but before I do that, if you happen to be in a minivan full of kids, maybe on the way to school drop-off, now would be a good time to pause this message and come back to it a little later, okay? Okay, so if you're reading these words and you're feeling some sexual undertones here, you are right on target. This is 100% a marriage proposal. A proposal that, honestly, if Boaz were really interested, he probably would have already made. Also, it's a very bold marriage proposal because she is a Moabite and he is an Israelite. So this is complicated. But let's go ahead and break down Naomi's instructions to Ruth. At first, some have questioned Naomi sending Ruth into the threshing floor in the middle of the night, especially after an evening of wine and dancing and sexual frivolity. I mean, if Ruth were in danger in the field in the middle of the day, then this just seems like an obscene move, right? But Naomi is doing this to secure Ruth's safety, not jeopardize it. Remember, her hope for Ruth from the start is that she would find a new husband. The worst fate in that time and place is that a woman would be left all on her own. And so this really was Naomi offering Hesed to Ruth. But Naomi also wants to protect Ruth in the here and the now. And that's why she's chosen this time, the middle of the night, for Ruth to go and make this proposition. Because if things go south, no one has to know. Naomi is certainly not trying to insult Boaz, and she definitely doesn't want Ruth humiliated. So if Boaz says no, Ruth can simply slip out into the darkness as easily as she came in, and no one has to know she was there. Now next, we have these wash and wear instructions. Ruth bathes, puts on perfume, dresses well before going to Boaz. The expectation in interpretation is that she's dressing as a bride right here. And that's understandable and probably quite historically accurate. But here's perhaps an unexpected interpretation, but also quite possible. It's possible that Ruth is simply not dressing as a widow for the first time in a long time. See, we have evidence in 2 Samuel 12 that David got up, he washed, and he dressed in fresh clothes when he declared that his time of mourning for his son was over. And so while we don't know for sure if Ruth was dressing as a bride, I think she's making it clear that she would like to be. Now next, Naomi says to sneak on to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you are there. This word used to describe Ruth's approach to Boaz means stealth-like. So the NIV has translated it quietly The ESV says softly, the NASB says secretly, but the NRSV actually gets it closest with stealthily. It's the same word that's used about David when he sneaks up behind King Saul in the cave and cuts off the corner of his robe. It's the same word that's used of Jael when she sneaks up behind Sisera to drive a tent peg through his head. So when you look at these other examples of this word, it kind of feels like Ruth is on the attack here. But please remember, this is not like Lot's daughter, who purposefully led her father to intoxication so that she could lie with him. This isn't even like Tamar, who disguised herself so that her father-in-law would recognize her and so that he would lie with her. Now, there's no trickery here. Boaz is completely aware of what is going on, and Ruth is completely upfront about who she is. But let's keep going. Next, we have three very significant words: uncover, feet, and lie down. Now, if laying down next to your spouse's bare feet doesn't really cause any kind of arousal in you, that's completely understandable. But these words are, in fact, laced with sexual intrigue. This word for uncover is actually found in Leviticus 18:6 in reference to nakedness. Feet was sometimes used in the Hebrew as a euphemism for male genitalia. But one example of that is Ezekiel 16:25. And then lie down, that's used in a lot of places to indicate intercourse. And Genesis 26:10 is just one example of that. Now, if this is making you uncomfortable, I do get that. I mean, we kind of have to ask the question here, is the intention that Ruth and Boaz would have sex right here on the threshing floor? Well, yes, quite possibly. Now, I don't think that they did, and I'm going to tell you in the next session why that is, but for now, let me just remind you of two things. Number one, we're talking about a different culture here. This would not have been that uncommon for a man and a woman to meet, to agree to marriage, and then to consummate, just like that. There really weren't that many formalities except for the family being on board, and the only family that Ruth has is Naomi, and Naomi's the one that sent her there. So if Boaz would have accepted Ruth's proposal, all of this would have been on the up and up. But here's the second thing. Naomi has sent Ruth into this situation because she trusts both Ruth and Boaz to do right by Yahweh in this moment. And Ruth only does this because she believes that she can trust Boaz and that she has shown Boaz that he can trust her. Now, I could say more on this, but for now, let's just remember who we're talking about, and let's remember the character of these people. And let's go and check on Boaz in verse 7. We find Boaz heading off to sleep. The barley is in, the harvest has been plentiful, his workers have been paid, a celebration has been had. He has even honored God by giving more to the poor than what was expected in the law. So things are grand in the land. And then he wakes up. Much to Boaz's dismay, there is a girl in his presence in the middle of the night. Now again, historically, traditionally, there would have been a fair amount of indulging in drink during the celebration of wrapping up the harvest. Along with that, there would have been dancing, probably some carousing and carrying on of various kinds. Now, I don't think it's likely that Boaz participated in these escapades because of what's said about his high moral character. But knowing that these things did happen on the threshing floor, he is more than just a little dismayed to find a female at his feet. And so the question is, who is she, and what does she want? Verse 9. Who are you, he asked. I am your servant Ruth, she said. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. Oh man, okay, we gotta pause again. I know, we didn't make it very far, but there is so much depth here I don't want you to miss. And do you remember back in chapter 2, when Boaz says, may you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge? That word that Boaz uses for wing is the exact same word used right here to talk about the corner of Boaz's garment. So Ruth is identifying who she is, and she's also identifying her intentions. She's essentially saying, I want you to answer your own prayers for me that you uttered over 2 months ago. In other words, I want you to be my protective wings. Or, in other words, marry me. And then she goes on and she says, you are a guardian redeemer of our family, a Goel of our family. But here's the thing. Ruth has followed Naomi's instructions to a T up to this point. Naomi told her how to dress, how to present herself, where to place herself, how to respond to him, and she's done all of that. But now in this moment, Ruth takes the script and chucks it out the window, and she goes rogue. Because she brings up the fact that Boaz is a guardian redeemer. Now, she heard Naomi call him that weeks ago when she first came home from the field of Boaz. In 2:20, Naomi mentions that Boaz is in fact a Goel, and we assume that she explained that to some degree because now Ruth is bringing it up here. But look back at chapter 3, verse 2. When Naomi was giving Ruth instructions for this moment, she didn't mention Goel. When sending Ruth to Boaz, she only says he's a relative or a guardian. But she leaves the legal redemption part out of it. In other words, she leaves herself out of it. Because see, a Goel would save the family of Elimelech. A Goel would save Naomi. But a relative, just a guardian, well, he would save Ruth. And once again, chesed, the love that comes from the character of God, is at work right here. But not to be outdone, Ruth isn't about to settle for her own needs being cared for. She wants redemption for her mother-in-law. It would seem that she's calling Boaz to a similar higher level of obedience, just like she did that first day in the field. She's saying there's the letter of the law, and then there's the spirit of the law. And so how does Boaz respond to her request? Exactly the way that you would expect. Verse 10. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness, this chesed, is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor, and now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Now, we're not told much about Boaz's life up to this point. And this unfortunately leads a lot of us in our Western mindset to just assume that Boaz is Bethlehem's most eligible bachelor. But that's not likely the case. His remark here about younger men leads us to the understanding that Boaz is older than Ruth, maybe significantly. That, combined with the fact that ancient Palestinian culture kind of indicates that one didn't rise to the position of power and influence that Boaz had unless he was married and had already procured sons. So what this means is Boaz is likely married and probably has sons. He's not necessarily looking for a wife. And yet, there is a clear affection for Ruth. But I want you to understand, this affection doesn't necessarily mean romance. But he's attracted to her selfless sacrifice for her mother-in-law. If there was any question about Ruth's motives before, Boaz now sees clearly that she's not there for herself. She's there for Naomi. That land didn't belong to Ruth's husband. It belonged to Naomi's husband. Naomi is too old to bear a child to bring about an heir. So were she to seek a redeemer for herself, that land would never return to her or her family name. But Ruth, on the other hand, though she has been barren for some years now, there's still a chance. And so Boaz rises up as the man of valor that he is, and he takes up his post, and he acknowledges Ruth's intelligence and her sacrifice, and he shows that he sees she is not just a man chaser. She is not after him for his money. She's not even asking him this because of her love for Boaz. She's doing this because she loves Naomi. And this is why Boaz, speaking to a foreign, barren, destitute widow, he says to her in verse 11, because of your character, I will do all you ask. And that word used there to describe Ruth's character is the exact same word that was used to describe Boaz's character in chapter 2. Perhaps the author is telling us that they were always meant to be together after all. But that is all of the romance that you're going to get out of me. Now, I wish that I could tell you the story ends here and that everybody lives happily ever after, but that's just not the case. No, actually, Boaz reveals to Ruth that there is another Goel. There is a relative that is a lot closer than himself. But Boaz says that he will go the very next day and he'll have a conversation with this man, and one way or another, redemption will be accomplished. And so then he has Ruth stay there until morning, likely for her safety. But he has her go ahead and leave in the early dawn for her honor. But before she goes, Boaz gives Ruth the equivalent of 60 plus pounds of grain to take back with her. A sign of his commitment. A symbol of chesed. And the close of chapter 3 is actually the last time that we hear the voices of Ruth and Naomi. Naomi asks her how things went, and Ruth responds by telling her everything that happened. And she shows Naomi the gift of goodwill that Boaz sent with her and told her that he wouldn't send her back empty-handed. And then in verse 18, Naomi says, "Wait, my daughter. Wait until you find out what happens. For this man will not rest until the matter is settled today." Naomi has poured out chesed on Ruth to ensure that she is cared for in the home of not just a man of integrity, but a man who follows after God. And Ruth has done chesed to Naomi to bring about a redemption story for her entire family, both the living and the dead. And now the results lie in the hands of Boaz, an upstanding man, a man of valor, worthy, mighty, and quite literally a redeemer. Just not the only redeemer. So how will their redemption come about? Oh, well, you'll have to wait till next time to find out. I'll see you then.
She does such a good job of telling the story. And
Sorry, I was reading on.
any thoughts about her presentation? Because we're going to be running short on time a little bit here, so we need to go to her time. So, one thing, the last thing we put on this list here, and you don't have it on here, but it was pray for your eyes and hearts to be open to these around you. Ask God to create in you a spirit of hesed, one that is compassionate and readily sacrificial for the benefit of others. And that's what it's talking about. Again, you get this picture in Ruth of us being the bride and Boaz being Jesus, the marriage between the bride and the Redeemer. And that's really what the picture of Ruth is all about, and to remain that way. Any questions before we go start handing out cards? Any thoughts you had on this? She does such a great job. And like I said, she got a little bit farther into it than when I first sat down with it and heard her talk and so. And I would appreciate it when you put your name on these cards to fold them in half. So I'm going to, Kathy, these cards don't have any lines on them.
That's all.